The Cherokee are indigenous people of North America of Iroquoian lineage. There are many theories about the origin of the name Cherokee. It may have originally been derived from one of the tribes in the area, the Choctaw, or one of the Iroquois Five Nation tribes. It is also believed the name is derived from a Creek word, meaning people of different speech. The name which Cherokee originally used for themselves is Aniyunwiya, meaning principal people. They speak an Iroquoian language and have a system of writing their own language developed in the 19th century by a famous and influential Cherokee leader called Sequoyah. Origins and ancestors anthropologists and historians have two main theories of Cherokee origins. One is that the Cherokee are relative latecomers to southern Appalachia, who may have migrated in late prehistoric times from northern areas around the Great Lakes. This has been the traditional territory of the Cherokee nations and other Iroquoian-speaking peoples. Other evidence indicates that the Cherokee migrated in prehistoric times from present-day Texas or northern Mexico to the Great Lakes area. They later migrated to the mountains and valleys of the southern part of the Appalachian chain. An ethnographer who lived with the tribe in the late 19th century named James Mooney recorded conversations with elders who recounted an oral tradition of the Cherokee people migrating south from the Great Lakes region in ancient times. By 1500 BC, a distinct Cherokee language had developed, and by the year 1000, the Cherokee were living a woodland lifestyle with unique cultural characteristics influenced by Mississippian traditions. Society, the Cherokee economy, like that of other Southeast tribes, was based primarily on agriculture, growing corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, and tobacco. Deer, bear, and elk were hunted with bows and arrows. Smaller game, such as raccoons, rabbits, squirrels, and turkeys were hunted with long cane-stem blowguns that propelled wood and feather darts. For fishing, hooks and lines, spears, and traps were used. Wild plant foods, including roots, greens, berries, and nuts, were also gathered for another source of nutrition. Clothing varied from season to season, but mainly consisted of woven cloth or deerskin. The women wore dresses, the men wore pants, and everybody wore shoes. In winter, they wore a cloak made of woven cloth or fur. Hairstyles differed wildly from clan to clan. Some men were clean-shaven. Others wore beards. Some men shaved their heads. Others wore a topknot or ponytail. At the time of European contact, the Cherokee were a settled agricultural people living in approximately 200 fairly large villages and towns. The typical Cherokee town consisted of 30 to 60 houses and a large council house, where general meetings were held and a sacred fire burned. Homes were usually wattle and daub, a circular framework interwoven with branches, like an upside-down basket, and plastered with mud. The entire structure was partially sunken into ground. Later, they turned to bark-roofed, windowless log cabins, with one door and a smoke hole in the roof. An important religious observance was the Basque or Green Corn Festival, a first fruits and new fire celebration. The Cherokees are a matrilineal society. In the old days, they were divided into 7 matrilineal clans, who lived in numerous permanent villages, typically placed along rivers and streams. Historically, women have primarily been the heads of households, owning the home and the land, farmers of the family's land, and mothers of the clans. As in many Native American cultures, Cherokee women are honored as life givers. As givers and nurturers of life via childbirth and the growing of plants, women are traditionally community leaders in Cherokee communities. The ancient Cherokees lived in an alternating state of war and peace, which called for a dual organization of tribal government, a white or peace organization, and a red or war organization. Each town was governed by its 2 head chiefs, the white chief in peacetime and the red chief in war. An assemblage of important women was present at every war council. These served as counselors to the male leaders and also regulated the treatment of prisoners of war. Slavery was a component of Cherokee society prior to European colonization, as they frequently enslaved enemy captives taken during times of conflict with other indigenous tribes. By their oral tradition, the Cherokee viewed slavery as the result of an individual's failure in warfare and as a temporary status pending release or the slave's adoption into the tribe. During the colonial era, Carolinian settlers purchased Cherokees as slaves during the late 17th and early 18th century. They were also among the Native American people who sold native slaves to traders for use as laborers in Virginia and further north. As the Cherokee began to adopt some European American customs, they began to purchase enslaved African Americans to serve as workers on their farms or plantations. When the Cherokee were forcibly removed on the Trail of Tears, they took slaves with them and continued to trade in Indian territory. European contact Hernando de Soto and his men, Spanish explorers, led an expedition that is believed to have made the first European contact in 1540 with the Cherokees when they met on the Tennessee River. De Soto didn't spend much time with them, but he was hostile toward other natives. Although the Juan Pardo expedition revisited the area in 1566, and the Spanish made a fort and a small mining and smelting operation in the area until 1690, the Cherokees' location in the interior mountains kept them relatively isolated until after the settlement of Virginia in 1609. By 1629, English traders had worked their way west into the Appalachians and met the Cherokee. Their population in the 17th century was about 20,000 to 50,000. In 1673, English settlers came to Echota, the capital of the Cherokee Nation, to establish trade relations. European goods such as brass kettles, textiles, scissors, knives, guns and ammunition, metal hatchets and hoes, and trinkets were exchanged for native deerskins, beeswax, river cane baskets, and native slaves. Important changes began to occur within the Cherokee society. As a result, leadership shifted from medicine man to warrior, and warriors became hunters for profit. Cherokee relations with their neighbors were not always friendly. They raided Spanish settlements in Florida during 1673 and fought the coastal tribes of the Carolinas. But European trade and competition aggravated these rivalries and destabilized the region. By 1680, most of the tribes had gotten their first firearms, and the Cherokee had fortified their larger villages. Constant fighting with the Catawba tribe erupted in the east, followed by a growing friction with the Creek and Choctaw to the south. To the west, there was a traditional hostility with the Chickasaw, also a British ally. To the north, the struggle between the French, Dutch, and English in the fur trade started the Beaver Wars. In 1730, the Cherokees made an alliance with the English by pledging their allegiance to the British crown, King George II, and promising to trade only with the English. Other European powers were making alliances with Native American tribes as well, so the English needed special protection from their greatest rival, the French. A series of smallpox epidemics in the 18th century cut the Cherokees' population in half. Diseases carried by the Europeans were a big problem for Native American people, cutting greatly their numbers at the time. By that time, Cherokee territory had been firmly established in the Appalachian region of the southeastern United States, encompassing terrain that included parts of modern North and Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and Georgia. However, through negotiations in 10 different treaties between 1721 and 1777 with Great Britain, large sections of land were given up by the Cherokee, dramatically reducing their territorial holdings. United States from the earliest days of American independence, relations with Native American tribes have been a primary concern for national security. Two of the most influential individuals in shaping the Indian policy by the new United States government were Henry Knox, Secretary of War, as well as President George Washington. President Washington believed civilizing or assimilating the tribes to European ideals would provide the best path to lasting peace. Their view of civilization meant that Native Americans would become farmers, giving up hunting, the vast lands needed to maintain the migratory lifestyle, and developing permanent villages. They felt natives should adopt European clothes and family life, learn to speak English, and convert to Christianity. Christian missionaries participated in the assimilation of the Cherokees. Missionaries taught reading, writing, arithmetic, housekeeping, personal grooming, table etiquette, and other topics. They discouraged them from any heathen activities. On the other hand, the Cherokee accepted ideas they considered helpful and rejected those that seemed useless. It soon became apparent that the new American settlers were no more willing to halt their territorial expansion than the English settlers before them. Deep and lasting divisions emerged within the Cherokee leadership and among the tribe itself about how to respond to the ongoing efforts of the new settlers. Some advocated for negotiation and assimilation, while others fought diplomacy at every turn. In the early years of the 18th century, a Cherokee man named Sequoyah helped his people preserve their language and cultural traditions and remain united amid the encroachment of the new American society into their territory. Working over a 12-year span, Sequoyah created a syllabary, a set of written symbols to represent each syllable in the spoken Cherokee language. This made it possible for the Cherokee to achieve mass literacy in a short period of time and different tribes to communicate wherever they are. By the early 1800s, the continual loss of Cherokee land caused many to relocate to reserved and temporarily undisputed lands further west. By the end of the 18th century, the Cherokee people living east of the Mississippi formed a centralized government. Affairs were no longer executed at the clan level. Approximately one-third of the Cherokee people moved to Indian Territory west of the Mississippi River around the year 1817. They signed a treaty with the United States that traded land in the southeastern United States for land in modern-day Arkansas. In 1828, Sequoyah went with a delegation of West Cherokees to Washington, D.C. to sign a new treaty exchanging land in Arkansas for land in modern-day Oklahoma, also known as Indian Territory, earning the name Old Settlers because they were the first of the tribe to settle Indian Territory in the West. The Cherokee made great efforts to show the United States that they assimilated. They established a new modern capital called New Okota, created their own constitution, and the first Native American newspaper. However, this did not ease the pressure put on the Cherokee to move west onto designated Indian Territory. The discovery of gold in Cherokee Territory brought these tensions to a head. Finally, in May 1830, President Jackson convinced Congress to pass his Indian Removal Act, which called for the removal of all eastern native tribes to a territory west of the Mississippi. For the 5 civilized tribes, the Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, signed removal treaties in 1832. The Cherokees rejected the demands of President Jackson and took their case to the Supreme Court. Several American lawyers helped Chief John Ross fight for his people in the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia case. Meanwhile, settlers continued to move and live in Cherokee territory, even if that was against the law. In 1834, much of the land Cherokees still claimed in Georgia was auctioned off in a land lottery. Despite Chief John Ross' objections, a small number of Cherokees, later known as the Treaty Party, met to formally accept the Treaty of New Okota, in which remaining Cherokee land was sold for territory in the West for $5 million, along with some provision and supplies for the journey west and a year's worth of federal support for those who moved. The U.S. Senate ratified the treaty, and President Jackson immediately signed it, giving the Cherokee until May 1838 to leave. The Trail of Tears as a result, almost 16,000 Cherokee, along with other natives, were forcibly moved from their eastern homeland. Although some of them stayed, hiding in the mountains, in June 1838, Cherokees were loaded on flatboats at Ross Landing, Georgia, and sailed down the Tennessee River. The boats were described as being so crammed that they nearly sank. Some rode the train, while others traveled on foot. Over 4,000 died on the long path to Oklahoma Territory. After the removal, Chief Ross and his supporters in the National Party encountered another problem: the construction of a new combined Cherokee government in the West. The Eastern Cherokees had a constitution modeled after the United States, but the old settlers created a system based on traditional Cherokee laws. Unable to come to a compromise, Sequoyah, an old settler, and Jesse Bushed, an Eastern Cherokee Baptist minister, made a suggestion for the parties to meet in July 1839 and let the people determine the form of government they preferred. Before that meeting took place, a group of Cherokees from the National Party plotted to take revenge on those they felt most responsible for signing the Treaty of New Okota and the Trail of Tears. Secretly, they made a list of people they felt deserved the ultimate penalty of death. Of these, 3 men were killed at approximately the same time. Major Ridge was killed while traveling the road in Washington County, Arkansas. Elias Boudinot was attacked by a group of men claiming they needed medicine, and John Ridge was dragged from his bed and stabbed to death. In July 1839, John Ross, the National Party, and a few representatives of the old settlers signed an act of union. In September, a constitution, similar to the one created in the East, was accepted with John Ross elected as principal chief and an old settler as second principal chief. For the next several years, the Cherokee Nation underwent a series of internal conflicts, sometimes violent, leading to civil war, as the Old Settlers, the Treaty Party, and the National Party adjusted to life in the West. Sequoyah worked with John Ross to try to bring peace between the factions. The war ended with a treaty between the factions brokered by the United States government on August 6, 1846. Signed by delegates from each faction, the 1846 treaty promised the land ceded to the Cherokee would be available for all members of the Cherokee Nation and offered a general amnesty for crimes committed against the nation or individuals. During the American Civil War, after a great internal conflict, the tribes sided with the Confederacy. The Cherokees in western North Carolina served as part of Thomas's Legion, a unit of approximately 1,100 men of both Cherokee and white origin fighting primarily in Virginia, where their battle record was outstanding. Thomas's Legion was the last Confederate unit to surrender in North Carolina at Waynesville on May 9, 1865. A post-war treaty with the United States freed the black slaves belonging to tribal members in Indian Territory. Between removal of the Cherokee Nation in 1838 and the end of the Civil War, many Cherokees gave their money to William Holland Thomas, their agent and later their only white chief, to purchase land for them. Thomas acquired many of the tracts that would make up the modern-day Koala boundary, the official name of the Cherokee Indian Reservation in North Carolina. These Cherokees, together with the hundreds who had hidden in the mountains, who already legally owned land to the Treaty of 1817, or who had escaped the Trail of Tears and returned, formed the nucleus of what would become the Eastern Cherokee Band. Under the General Allotment Act of 1887, uncompromisingly resisted by the Cherokee, plots of tribal land were forcibly allotted to individual members. Surplus lands not assigned to Cherokee individuals were parceled out by the federal government, and in 1891, the tribe's western land expansion, the Cherokee Strip or Cherokee Outlet, was sold to the United States. In 1893, it was opened mostly to non-native settlers. 20th century and the present, the Cherokee government was dissolved, and its people became U.S. citizens when Oklahoma achieved statehood in 1907. In this action, the Oklahoma Cherokee lost their right to elect their own chiefs, who were from there and were appointed by presidents, until 1970, when the Cherokee regained their right to elect their own government via a congressional act signed by President Nixon. On August 21, 1918, British forces began attacking German positions along a 10-mile stretch of the Western Front in northwest France. The assault was part of the World War I action, now known as the Somme Offensive. Attached to the British troops fighting in the region were the 119th and 120th U.S. Infantry Regiments, which both contained a number of Cherokee soldiers from western North Carolina. The signal officers at the time guessed that the Germans wouldn't be able to understand the Cherokee language and instructed Cherokee troops to deliver messages by telephone in their native tongue. The tactic proved to be a success. The Cherokee code talkers were the first known use of Native Americans in the American military to transmit messages under fire, and they continued to serve in this unique capacity for the rest of World War I. After World War II broke out, the Cherokees were amongst 25,000 Native Americans who fought actively both in Europe and the Pacific. Cherokees were also code talkers once again, alongside many other Native tribes. During the Civil Rights Movement, they fought for Native and African American rights, regaining the right to elect their own government. Today, 3 Cherokee tribes are federally recognized: the United Kituah Band of Cherokee Indians in Oklahoma, the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in North Carolina. In the year 2000, about 281,000 people identified themselves as Cherokee, and an additional 448,000 people reported being part Cherokee. The Cherokee language is spoken by an estimated 12,000 to 22,000 people today.